There are days when Taurus walks back into the house after work and just stands there for a long time in front of a quiet kitchen. No music playing, no TV in the background, just the low hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the corner, and rain tapping softly against the window. Everything still looks fine in that familiar kind of way. Work messages keep coming in. The calendar is still full. You still answer people in a calm, normal voice, like nothing ever happened. But deep down, there's a strange silence slowly growing inside you. It's not exactly sadness, and it doesn't feel like the loneliness people usually talk about either. It feels more like sitting in your car after a long day. The traffic light finally turns green. Someone behind you taps their horn very lightly. But for some reason, you just don't want to move yet. You only want a few more seconds to sit there alone with yourself. Taurus often lives as if they have to be stronger than their real emotions. Stable, composed, the one who keeps everything from falling apart. Some Taurus people get so used to swallowing everything quietly, they stop noticing how tired they really are. I once knew a Taurus like that. Someone who always showed up on time, always remembered what everyone liked to eat, always stayed until the very end to drive people home. But also someone who kept an unsent message sitting in their phone for months, simply because they didn't know how to begin again. That's very Taurus. They love deeply, but they hide it carefully. Sometimes they can sit beside someone all evening, listening to them talk for hours, smiling softly, while secretly carrying words they never managed to say out loud. And strangely enough, the older Taurus gets, the less they explain their feelings. They choose silence. Not because the feelings disappeared, but because some emotions feel too real to fit neatly into words. There are days when that silence follows Taurus through the entire afternoon. While cooking dinner, while watching people pass by outside a coffee shop window, or lying in bed replaying an old voice message from someone, even though they already know there's nothing new left to hear. If you're a Taurus, you probably know that feeling. That feeling where everything outside of you keeps moving normally, but inside, it feels like you're standing alone in a huge quiet room, hearing nothing except your own heartbeat. Sometimes I think Taurus isn't really afraid of losing someone. What scares them more is the thought that after too many disappointments, their heart might become so quiet that it no longer knows how to feel deeply anymore. And yet, it's inside those long stretches of silence that Taurus slowly begins to see themselves more clearly. They start noticing who they've been trying so hard to stay strong for. They start noticing what they've been holding on to too tightly. And they realize that some emotions they thought had gone to sleep a long time ago are still resting quietly somewhere inside them. If you're still listening right now, maybe leave a gentle comment for Taurus. Something simple like, Taurus is learning how to soften too. Because sometimes, just knowing someone else understands that feeling can make the heart feel a little lighter. And maybe it's from these quiet moments that are so hard to explain that Taurus slowly begins stepping into a deeper part of their emotional story, a place where the heart slowly stops fighting the things it still quietly remembers. There are very ordinary afternoons when Taurus drives past an old street, watching the late sunlight stretch across the windows of familiar little shops, and suddenly feels something sink softly inside their chest. Not because anything happened, just because for a few brief seconds, an old feeling passed through the heart again. Like the faint scent still lingering on a jacket you haven't worn in a very long time. Soft, almost nothing, but enough to make someone pause for a while. Taurus rarely talks about moments like that. You still answer, "I'm fine," when people ask. You keep your voice calm. You continue your work like nothing ever touched you at all. But there are nights, after the phone notifications finally go quiet, after the apartment is lit by nothing except that small yellow kitchen light, the Taurus realizes a part of their heart never truly left certain memories behind. Maybe it's an old conversation, a quiet car ride beside someone where neither person really said much, or simply the feeling of being looked at with a kind of calm you don't easily forget. The things Taurus remembers the longest usually aren't the dramatic moments. It's the small details, a hand resting gently on your shoulder when you were exhausted. A simple, drive home safe. Or the feeling that someone actually noticed when you became quieter than usual. Maybe Taurus loves through the feeling of safety more than people realize. Not through intense passion, but through the feeling of finally being able to exhale, to be yourself, without constantly holding yourself together. And maybe that's why, when a connection once touched the softest part inside a Taurus heart, it rarely disappears completely. It just moves somewhere deeper, resting there quietly, like an old song you haven't played in years. And then one day, the right emotional frequency returns, and everything begins to vibrate softly again. I used to think Taurus was the kind of person who wasn't easily affected by emotions, until I saw a Taurus sitting alone in their car long after work, replaying the same old song over and over again, without even paying attention to the lyrics anymore. Some people look so calm on the outside that others forget they also carry memories that are hard to walk through. That's something very unique about Taurus. They can endure almost anything, and yet somehow, their heart still softens around the smallest things no one else notices. And the deeper Taurus moves into this season of silence, the more they begin to feel things that logic alone cannot fully explain. There are people who no longer appear often in your life, and somehow their presence still lingers quietly in everyday moments. In the sound of rain falling outside the balcony, in the empty chair beside the coffee shop window, in that moment when you open your phone, then close it again because you no longer know how to begin the conversation. Maybe that's when Taurus realizes some connections don't need constant words to stay alive, and sometimes it's the long silence itself that finally allows the heart to hear everything that was never said out loud. Not through words, but through tiny feelings that appear during the moments when people are the least guarded. There are evenings when Taurus stands at the kitchen sink in complete silence, water running steadily from the faucet, light rain drifting outside the window, and suddenly remembers something someone once said years ago. Just a simple sentence, so ordinary that back then, no one would have imagined it would stay that long. But memory is strange sometimes. It doesn't hold on to the biggest moments. It holds on to the truest ones. A hesitant glance before someone turned away. A quiet pause during a phone call where neither person wanted to hang up first. Or the feeling that someone once understood you without needing too many explanations. Taurus usually isn't very good at talking about their wounds. You tend to fold every emotion neatly inside yourself, then place it somewhere deep and hidden. You keep living normally. You keep taking care of people. You keep handling your responsibilities like nothing ever happened. But feelings don't truly disappear just because we stay silent about them. Sometimes, the harder we try to forget something, the deeper it settles into memory. And one day, in the middle of a completely ordinary moment, everything returns so softly, your heart doesn't even have time to prepare. I once saw a Taurus sitting alone in the parking lot after work, just because someone nearby accidentally played an old song they used to listen to with someone important. They didn't cry. They didn't text anyone. They just sat there quietly, watching rain collect on the windshield, as if some forgotten part of the past had quietly opened its door again. Maybe that's what people don't fully understand about Taurus. They don't open their heart easily, but once someone truly reaches that space inside them, the feeling tends to stay for a very long time, in many different forms. Sometimes as longing, sometimes as regret, sometimes just as an emptiness that's hard to explain whenever they pass an old familiar place. And as Taurus grows older, they slowly begin to realize that not every connection falls apart because love was missing. Sometimes, two people simply met each other before they knew how to hold on to one another properly. One person too proud to ask someone to stay, the other too exhausted to keep explaining themselves. And then both people became silent. Silent for so long, it started to feel like everything was over. But the truth is, some emotions don't disappear with time. They simply change the way they exist. From daily conversations into a quiet ache resting somewhere in the heart. From always wanting to stay close into occasionally thinking of someone during the stillest hours of the day. And strangely enough, that distance sometimes changes the way Taurus sees everything. no longer through the wounded ego of the past, but through the softness of a heart that has already carried enough exhaustion. You begin to realize that the older version of yourself was clumsy with love too. There were moments when silence didn't mean indifference. It meant there was simply too much chaos inside to find the right words. Some people didn't leave because they were never sincere. Sometimes, both people were just trying to protect themselves in deeply lonely ways. And eventually, Taurus begins to understand something that feels both sad and strangely beautiful. That growing up isn't always about keeping a relationship forever. Sometimes it's about being able to look back without carrying so much anger anymore. Only a very quiet softness remains, like rain slowly fading after a long storm. And maybe that's when the first cracks begin to appear in the walls Taurus has been carrying around for years. It wasn't the kind of collapse that happens loudly. There was no dramatic moment, no explosion. No scene anyone else could point to and say, that's when everything changed. It was more like, one day, Taurus quietly realized they no longer had the energy to carry everything the same way they always had. Tired of always pretending to be okay. Tired of constantly holding the emotional balance for everyone else. Tired of the way every time the heart tried to soften even a little, the mind immediately built another wall in front of it. Some Taurus people have lived so long with the feeling that, if I don't take care of myself, nobody else will. So they get used to handling everything alone. If they're hurting, they deal with it quietly. If they're exhausted, they carry it silently. There are even days when Taurus goes through something deeply painful and still replies to messages in a completely normal voice, still checks on other people like nothing happened at all. I once met a Taurus like that. Someone who made everyone around them feel safe, yet had no idea how to let themselves lean on anyone else. One night, we were sitting in a small restaurant close to closing time. Rain was falling softly outside. The staff had already started stacking chairs onto the tables, and that Taurus said something very quietly. I'm so used to carrying everything alone that when someone genuinely cares about me, I honestly don't know what to do with it. I remembered that sentence for a very long time, because it feels so much like Taurus. It's not that they don't want love. It's that they've spent so much of their life surviving through strength that when someone finally gets close for real, their first instinct is still defense. Like a house that survived too many storms. Even long after the weather clears, the windows remain shut out of habit. And maybe the hardest thing for Taurus isn't opening their heart the first time. It's believing they no longer have to armor themselves just to survive another connection. The changes during this season happen quietly. Taurus starts trying less to control everything, less trying to predict who might leave, less forcing themselves to stay perfectly logical through every emotion. You slowly learn to let conversations happen naturally, instead of rehearsing 10 different emotional reactions inside your head first. You start allowing yourself to be quiet without feeling guilty for it. You allow yourself to soften sometimes, without immediately criticizing yourself afterward. There are evenings when Taurus sits alone on the balcony for a long time, the ice in the glass almost melted, traffic outside slowly fading into the distance, and suddenly realizes the loneliness they carried for years didn't entirely come from missing someone. Part of it came from never truly allowing anyone into the deepest parts of themselves. Fear of being seen. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear that one day someone would leave and take those hidden, softer pieces with them. So Taurus chose strength, chose stability, chose becoming the person who needed no one. But with time, Taurus slowly begins to understand something else. No one feels truly light while wearing armor for too long. Some walls protect us in the beginning, but eventually, they make the heart feel suffocated too. And then this quiet season arrives like a soft rain lasting for days, not destroying everything, just slowly softening the ground after a very long drought. Taurus begins realizing that peace doesn't come from being stronger than the world. It comes from no longer feeling the need to fight the world every second of the day. Maybe that's why people who make it through this kind of silence often change so deeply afterward. Not because they become weaker, but because the heart finally learns how to breathe more gently in the presence of another person. And somewhere inside those tiny cracks, Taurus slowly begins to realize the body and soul have been tired for far longer than they ever admitted to themselves. Not the kind of exhaustion that disappears after one good night of sleep, more like the quiet kind of burnout that slowly builds over months, sometimes years, from trying too hard for too long without ever truly allowing yourself to stop. There are mornings when Taurus wakes up right on schedule, just like always, but sits at the edge of the bed for a long time before finding the energy to stand. The phone keeps vibrating on the table. Outside the window, the daylight looks completely normal, but inside, it feels like the battery has been drained for a very long time already. I think a lot of Taurus people understand that feeling, the feeling of still being able to do everything, but no longer feeling fully present inside any of it. You still answer work messages, you still meet up with people. You still smile at the right moments during small conversations. But your mind always feels slightly fogged over. Sometimes Taurus can sit in the middle of a crowded coffee shop and still only want to go home, take off the shoes they've worn all day, sit quietly on the living room floor, and listen to a slow song in the dark. Not because they hate the world outside. The heart has simply been tense for too long. There was a time when I used to think Taurus was almost impossible to break. They're so resilient that people sometimes forget they feel pain too. But the more Taurus people I've met, the more I've realized they usually only allow themselves to fall apart when nobody else is around to see it. Alone in the car, standing in the kitchen late at night, or resting their forehead against the window after a long day, with no energy left to pretend they're okay anymore. Taurus carries a very quiet kind of responsibility. They rarely talk about it. But deep down, they keep forcing themselves to be the strongest person in the room. And after a while, they forget what real rest is even supposed to feel like. Some people take days off, but their mind never truly rests. Some people go to bed early, while their thoughts are still crowded with everything left unresolved. Some Taurus people live in emotional survival mode for so long that when life finally becomes quiet, the silence itself feels unfamiliar. But maybe this quiet season is trying to teach Taurus something different. That slowing down isn't always the same thing as falling behind. Sometimes the body notices the truth before the heart is ready to admit it. It makes you sleep longer, want more time alone, pull away from shallow conversations, crave smaller, quieter things. A warm meal, a clean blanket carrying the scent of sunlight, soft rain outside the balcony, or driving slowly through old neighborhoods with nowhere urgent to be. It feels like when Taurus becomes truly exhausted, they stop searching for huge things. They only want to feel safe, to breathe without constantly bracing themselves. I remember one Taurus once telling me that the thing that made them feel most peaceful wasn't promises. It was simply having someone sit beside them for a long time, without demanding explanations for every emotion they carried. That was all. But for Taurus, that kind of presence can feel more valuable than 1,000 beautiful words. And maybe that's why, during this slower season of life, Taurus slowly begins returning to the body again, eating more slowly, walking more slowly, lingering longer beneath the evening sunset. Sometimes just standing beside the window watching raindrops slide down the glass is enough to soften the heart a little. As if after years of surviving through responsibility and endurance, the heart is finally relearning what it feels like to be cared for. Not through anything dramatic, but through very small moments, quiet enough to hear yourself again. And maybe somewhere inside that quiet recovery, Taurus begins noticing very small changes starting to appear within the heart. Not big enough to completely change a life overnight, just very small things, but enough for the heart to realize it doesn't feel the same anymore. There are mornings when Taurus wakes up and notices the mind feels a little quieter. Same room, same sunlight slipping through the familiar curtains. But the heaviness that had been sitting in the chest for months somehow feels a little lighter now. Like after days of endless rain, the sky finally begins to brighten somewhere far away. Nobody notices these changes except Taurus. And honestly, sometimes Taurus doesn't notice them right away either. It's only when an old song suddenly plays again and the heart no longer aches the way it used to, that you realize something inside has been quietly healing all along. I think real healing usually happens like that, not loudly, not through some dramatic moment big enough to post online or explain to everyone else. Sometimes it's simply this. One day, Taurus walks past a place that once made the chest tighten, and for the first time, doesn't feel the need to look away so quickly. Or seeing someone's name drift back into memory, and instead of loss, there's only a very quiet tenderness left behind, as if that memory finally found a peaceful place to rest. Some Taurus people begin changing the way they love through very small shifts like these. No longer trying to hold everything together through stubborn silence. No longer forcing themselves to predict every emotion another person might have just to avoid getting hurt. You slowly begin to understand that a real connection shouldn't require you to exhaust yourself just to keep it alive. It shouldn't leave the heart stretched tight all the time. It shouldn't force you to live in constant waiting, or fear of being left behind. I once heard a Taurus say they used to believe loving someone meant holding on as tightly as possible. But as they grew older, they realized some of the most beautiful relationships were simply the places where they could finally breathe normally. It sounds simple, but I think a lot of Taurus people understand exactly what that means. The feeling of sitting beside someone without needing to become a better or more perfect version of yourself. The feeling of silence without pressure to fill every empty space. The feeling of softening a little without fearing the other person will suddenly see you differently. Maybe after carrying so much emotional exhaustion, Taurus no longer searches for intense feelings the way they once did. Now they search for peace, a kind of closeness that doesn't require losing yourself, a conversation that can last for hours without anyone trying too hard to impress the other. Someone who understands that when Taurus becomes quiet, it doesn't always mean distance. Sometimes it simply means they're feeling too much inside all at once. And somewhere inside those subtle little changes, Taurus slowly realizes the heart is no longer living in constant defense mode anymore. There are evenings when you leave the window open longer just to listen to the rain. Moments while driving alone when an old memory suddenly makes you smile instead of ache. Silences that no longer feel frightening. They become places where Taurus can finally rest. And honestly, I love the way Taurus changes during this season. Not the kind of transformation that makes everyone stop and stare. Something much quieter than that. Much deeper. Like a room that stayed locked for years, finally opening the door just enough for light to slip inside. Not too much. Just enough for the air to begin feeling different. And maybe through those very small changes, Taurus slowly begins to realize that the silence they feared for so long has actually been opening something softer inside the heart all along. A part of the heart that no longer feels the need to rush so much. No longer trying to control everything the way it once did. Just quietly learning how to sit beside its own emotions without fighting them. There are things Taurus once believed would take forever to move beyond. And then one day, looking back, you suddenly realize the pain is no longer standing in the center of your chest anymore. It's still there as an old memory, but it no longer makes the heart feel heavy every time it returns. Like a room that used to live in darkness, now letting a little light slip through the curtains each morning. Not bright, not dramatic, just enough for the air inside to feel different. And maybe growing up sometimes looks exactly like that. Not becoming a completely different person, but learning how to be gentler with the version of yourself that once carried so much hurt. I've always felt that Taurus carries a very quiet kind of strength. They endure so well that people sometimes assume they don't need comfort, or softness, or someone willing to truly listen. But behind that calm exterior is often a heart that has walked through many long days alone, without knowing who to share the weight with. Maybe that's why when Taurus finally opens their heart again, they're no longer searching for intensity. They're searching for peace, a place where they don't have to hold themselves so tightly just to be loved. A look in someone's eyes that doesn't make them feel defensive, a silence that still feels warm enough to stay inside together. And sometimes I wonder, how many Taurus people out there have experienced that strange moment where life suddenly slows down, and they realize their heart is softening in ways they can't fully explain? If you're still here, still listening to this story somewhere inside a quiet room of your own, maybe you've known a silence like that too. A silence that once frightened you, but slowly taught you how to breathe more gently. Thank you for staying with me through the final moments of this story. And if these small pieces of Taurus have ever made your heart feel a little softer, maybe you'll want to stay here again sometime for more slow and honest conversations like this one. There may still be many things in life that remain unclear, but maybe right now, if the heart no longer has to brace itself quite so hard anymore, that alone can already feel like a kind of peace. And somewhere between the soft sound of rain, the warm yellow light at the end of the day, and the silences that no longer feel so frightening, this story is still resting gently inside Taurus.